just really kind of, that just threw me for a loop when I listened to that. I was like, wait, what?
Yes.
Oh,
We started many names.
yeah. And Yahweh was one of them.
He doesn't have just one name.
No, he's got several. I don't remember what this, it started with a Y, but it wasn't Yahweh. It was something else.
That way.
No, we started with a Y. I don't remember. I'll have to see if I can find that video again, even though I really don't want to watch it, but I mean, it was just,
No, the yellow way.
It's like,
Nope, that's something.
I don't know.
Happy New Year.
Just like my social battery.
That's cool. You're about halfway. I think I'm gonna grab yours.
It trains
Every
itself.
time I forgot what it was.
So I have, I'm gonna go through my book and see if
You want me to give you the answer for this? It's hands and face.
Oh, hands and face.
yeah.
Well, see, I thought there was a trick question at first, because I didn't read this, I just looked at that, and I'm thinking, oh, there's gotta be a car in there somewhere. But then, no, Jason, it's not.
Did I? No.
Are you writing names?
I did.
It's gonna be a fun
Rob
night
and I
because
have
some
one
people don't have
Silver
their
Jeep is
answers.
mine. I turned in
I got mine with extra stuff.
It's not.
My mom was laughing at me because I was attempting to write the Hebrew for this one word.
I'm not sweating my
Actually,
face, I couldn't stand it anymore.
And he,
So I'm not trying to get. So
Yeah.
needs a couple people with an answer. Mine need.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, we don't have to call.
We have,
One
we have
person
to be able
not
to
a
make it work, I'm good.
We opted out and you get to answer all the questions today.
That's cheating.
Oh,
No, it's called being a leader, Brian.
For proof, here are all my answers. And I could get pictures and send them to everybody, but you might have a hard time reading my writing. I have a hard time reading my writing.
Detail on it.
Uh-oh, it's gonna be a short class then.
Jody, could you, just like you did to the little one on Sunday?
I don't think she can wave her arms.
No.
stop crying.
God bless you.
We need like the giant palm leaves or whatever those are.
Chinese band.
Yeah.
We need somebody with that.
Yeah, big palm leaves. Some for me and some for you.
Oh, he's cold.
You're crazy.
No,
That's
he's
because he
not.
don't have no
He is
meat
not.
on his bone.
He's not. He's not cold. He said it was hot.
Not working right, like
No, it's not blowing hot.
it is.
Did you say it's not blowing hot?
Uh,
It's blowing lukewarm.
She said it's not working. I said, no, it's not. It's blowing hot.
But Dad might disagree because you can see the curtains kind of.
But it's blowing warm.
Yeah, but
Well,
it's blowing.
he's sitting by the air, so maybe
Because
he
I'm
is
telling
cold.
you from what I can feel of
The
it.
air is right there, come right here.
Yeah, it's
by me.
lukewarm air. Yeah.
It's just not blowing cold.
And, no, it's not cold, it's
Yeah.
cool, but not cold.
Let's not keep me cool. No, it's-
Just saying, it's more efficient to just keep it on.
Chuck, I'm glad you're here via YouTube. We need better air conditioning.
Yes.
It's hot in here.
I turned the camera around for proof. We got people passing out. Okay, but that's might be a little exaggeration, but they are fanning themselves. I got cold drinks that cool me off. I need to stop doing that. Excuse me.
There are plenty of waters in the fridge if anybody needs a
Yeah.
water. I left them there for.
And I do have another fan. If anybody needs them.
Feels like a sauna in here.
She has an extra one. She
I apologize in advance if I take my shirt off. I do have a t-shirt underneath this. Ooh.
We need air.
where's this is?
All right, it is time for us to get started.
I can't do two.
I'm sorry, I can't give any answers because I'm waving my paper as a fan.
I read your pun today.
No, but I did say that church buildings have two temperatures. The one is we're reminding you don't want to go to hell, and the other one is Alaska. There's
No in between. Heard you guys are sick. Hope you guys are better soon, Chuck. All right, we are in Judges chapter 12. Not quite as long of a chapter as last week's. Last week's was 40 verses. This week's 15 verses. Brian was trying to figure out maybe a way to combine things, but then next week is a whole nother discussion and topic. So we're dealing with the chapter tonight, as short as it is. About how many years of history have passed? For about 450. I can't even get the question out. You guys knew I was going to ask. I was thinking about this, though. This is kind of a thought question. Maybe I should share this with the young table because they're struggling right now. Should we study the book of Judges, and why? Do you guys, any thoughts? Anybody can answer, not just the... All right, we should study the book of Judges.
Yeah, because when you're doing what God tells you to do, things go well, and when you're not following God, things don't go well.
Well, and you're to study the whole counsel, which is every ounce of the Bible. So it's there for our learning.
So it's there for our learning. It's pretty historical, right?
Whether it's learning to lead, or learning to be led, or learning to obey, or learning to
Well,
not
not
side
to.
with the
Yeah,
enemy.
And
there's-
it also gives you the context of some of the other things that you read in some of the other books. So you don't read this, you kind of don't really understand things that are happening later on, or even some of the Psalms, you won't understand some of them.
I mean, later on, you get into the book of prophecy, right? The prophets, and be like, "What? Why are these people idol worshipers? Why is God punishing them?" But you go back to the book of Judges, you see they struggle with that for a long time, right? So it is historical. It does give background context for other books, portions of the scriptures. Speaking of history, I know not everybody likes to study history, but it's pretty important to study, right? Because if you fail to learn from history, what are you apt to do?
Repeat it.
But
You
it's
can see that in Judges.
but it's mind-boggling to me that even in our current day and age and times, people still repeat history,
Yeah.
don't we? So, but anyway, it's still there. We should still study it and learn from it. So chapters 1 and 2 was a time period leading up to Joshua's death, and really sets the stage for the remainder of the book, that sin cycle, right? They would sin, they'd be oppressed, they would repent, they'd turn back to God. God would give them a judge, a deliverer, and then they would have peace, tranquility for a time, prosperity, and then the process would start all over again. Judges chapters 3 and 4, we read of 4 judges: Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah. Chapter 5 was that interlude, or that brief pause there, sharing this victory song by Deborah and Barak. Chapters 6 through 8 was a 5th judge. Anybody remember his name? He had 2 names. Gideon. Yeah. Who? Who did you say? Did you just say Jabba-Juba? I did just, not Jabba-Dua, like Cherubable, but Gideon, that's, Gideon.
She took the easy one.
Well, thank you for trying, A for effort. Chapter 9, did Gideon have a bad son? A wicked son? Abimelech. And that chapter 9 was all about him. Now, some lists include him in the list of judges. Some lists do not include him because he's not ever called a judge, but he did rule or reign over Israel. So just keep that in mind. Depending on the list that you read, that maybe mankind writes down, it may or may not include Abimelech in there. What kind of man was Abimelech? We already said. Yeah, we said he was a bad man, but he was. What were some things that he did?
He beat all of his brothers.
Yeah.
70 brothers.
Yeah, 70. He had them all beheaded, right?
Maybe they didn't want to remember him. Maybe it was a time that They're like, let's just leave him off the list.
I mean, it was a bad
why
time.
it's-
Well, he was more of his reigning or ruling was more like a dictator.
Yeah.
And people couldn't stand him, and he was oppressive, and the people of Shechem turned against him, and he turned against Shechem. How did Abimelech end up dying? Anybody remember?
Millstone was thrown down.
Yeah, that lady pushed that millstone off the tower and crushed his head, and then he had the young man stab him because he didn't want to be
With that spike.
forever known as the man who died. But yet he's forever known as the man who died that way.
Stone on his head.
Yeah,
A woman can lift a car off a baby, she can push a millstone off the top of a tower.
that is adrenaline. That is, yes. Chapter 10, there were two more judges. Anybody remember their names?
Shamgar and.
No, Shamgar was Tola and Jair, and then Israel returned to their sinful ways, and then Israel began looking for someone to help deliver them. And then chapter 11, they found that someone, and he would be the next judge, Jephthah. All right, so maybe the ninth judge, depending on how you're keeping track of that. Something that we learned from chapter 11 is when you make a vow, make sure you keep it, and make sure you're careful of the vows that you make. And then Addison, I know you were traveling last week, so you weren't able to be with us. She was out in Oklahoma visiting the Wilshire Church of Christ, where Jody and I attended when we were in college. So that was kind of cool. But anyway, there are some discussions as to, and this is a theological debate, whether he actually performed a human sacrifice or he didn't. You can go back and watch the replay of that last week. What? Well, there's room for, again, there's puzzling language, there's Hebrew idiomatic terms. Don't.
Who did with her according to his vow that he had made?
Again, there's a struggle between, there's conservative people on one side that says he didn't. There's conservative people. Yeah, and then there's conservative people on the other side that said he did. So there's arguments going both ways. Like I said last week, it's not my job to tell you what to believe. You need to think about it, study it a little bit deeper for yourself, and you can form your own conclusions.
But the point was,
Yeah, the point is vows are important. Promises. You make a promise, you're going to keep that promise. And then chapter 12. It's kind of a continuation of Jephthah's narrative, right? It's going to continue talking about him. We do see that he was involved in a conflict,
yes,
a sad conflict. We'll talk more about that as later on in the text. And then there's three more judges at the end of this chapter that we will talk about as well. So don't want to give away the names because there might be some answers for your questions. All right. Anyway, so let's start verses 1 through 7, and then we'll go back and answer these questions. Judges 12, verse number 1 says, Then the men of Ephraim gathered together, crossed over toward Zaphon, and said to Jephthah, Why did you cross over to fight against the people of Ammon, and did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house down on you with fire. And Jephthah said to them, My people and I were in a great struggle with the people of Ammon, and when I called you, you did not deliver me out of their hands. So when I saw that you would not deliver me, I took my life in my hands and crossed over against the people of Ammon, and the Lord delivered them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day to fight against me? Now Jephthah gathered together all the men of Gilead and fought against Ephraim, and the men of Gilead defeated Ephraim because they said, You Gileadites are fugitives of Ephraim among the Ephraimites and among the Manassites. The Gileadites seized the fords of the Jordan before the Ephraimites arrived, and when any Ephraimite who escaped said, Let me cross over, the men of Gilead would say to him, Are you an Ephraimite? If he said no, then they would say to him, Then say Shibboleth, and he would say Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce it right. Then they would take him and kill him at the fords of the Jordan. There fell at that time 42,000 Ephraimites. And Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried among the cities of Gilead. All right. So let's pause there. We're going to look at question number 1 here a second. The wheel spinning. I think Catherine says KKV. I felt like I glanced down a second ago and I thought that said KJV is here too. What? Catherine, glad to have you here, Catherine. As long as you're using the NKJV. Anyway, just kidding, just a joke. All right, young ladies, who does question number 1 go to?
So weird saying that.
Feels so weird. Did she just did she just say your name was?
There's like 3 grandmas.
Yeah, right. Yeah. All right. So question number 1: who was upset with Jephthah, and why were they upset?
The men of Ephraim, because Jephthah did not call them to fight among the people of Ammon.
All right. Verse
1.
number 1. All right. Anybody get anything different? That was a pretty easy question.
Just that they probably wanted part of the loot.
Well, so that's the little bit extra that you put in there. Did you know that this is not the first time the people of Ephraim,
No.
the leaders of Ephraim, got upset with the quote-unquote judges? Can you think of the other time they were upset?
Not right off,
Not right off. All right, well, let me help you out because I see some wheels are spinning. Chapter 8, did you say almost, or you were going to say earlier?
No, I think you said it earlier.
Yeah, I did. It was Gideon, chapter 8. They were mad with Gillian. Gillian.
And what?
They were mad with Gideon.
About the
Thanks.
same thing, it was for not
Yeah,
calling against
for
the
not.
Midianites.
Yeah,
Yeah, when he had.
yeah. So they were upset that Gideon didn't call them to fight the Midianites. So here, Judges 12, verses 1 through 6. This is the second time they were upset. Both instances would have been fueled by pride, jealousy. Jody was talking about, and we talked about this before in Judges 8. They would have wanted to been part of those wars to be able to acquire some of the loot from these fights. So they had ulterior motives, and here we see they had deep anger. You also remember Ephraim, the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. They were a little bit prideful. These were the 2 tribes that approached Joshua saying they wanted more land. Do you remember that? Because they were great. And this is Judges 17, verse 14, or Joshua 17, verse 14 and following. So they were an arrogant group of people. They were prideful. And here they are. They were jealous and deep anger. What do they want to do?
burn his whole house down.
Burn his house down
On top of him.
with him with him in
Because
it.
that's an appropriate response to, hey, we need to get some of the loot.
So we did.
Go to war, so.
So
Like, so we're gonna burn you down.
so we have talked about anger, right? There's good anger, bad anger. This is bad anger. This is really bad. They wanted to cause bodily harm to him. Yes.
Sorry, this is, I mentioned, same thing, it happened with the Gideon in
Yeah.
the last chapter, same thing, the men of Ephraim, they do the same thing for all the people. But his reaction is different than Gideon. This, his name, Jephthah? How do you say it?
Jephthah?
Jephthah, yeah.
Jephthah.
So you can definitely tell, not condoning their behaviors at all, but you could tell that these men are very warrior
Yes.
fighting men, right? They were just like they didn't. Gideon was diplomatic in his response to the people. People have said, well, Jephthah's response that we'll get to here in a minute, that's a little bit diplomatic. So it's like diplomacy amongst certain people was far and few between. Most of them were warriors, and all they knew was to fight. And so that was their natural response. We're mad at you. We're going to kill you. It's...
But it says he had asked them before to take care of him, to go fight him, and they're like, they were busy.
Okay, so you're jumping ahead. That's question number 2.
Maybe they have big numbers.
Yeah, well,
The men
let's...
of Ephraim, that's why they are strong or big
Well,
numbers.
there's big numbers, arrogance. That generation knew war. They came into the promised land and they were driving out all their enemies from all that land, all the way from the Sea of Galilee, all the way to the south, and even to the east of the Jordan River. All right, you guys got the wheel spinning. All right, who does question 2 go to? Laura Hopcroft. All right, so why did Jephthah say he didn't call on them?
My people and I were in great struggle with the people of Ammon, and when I called upon you, you did not deliver me out of their hand.
All right, verse number 2. So
I said
He-
that was a trick question, because he did call on them, or he said
Well-
he did call on them.
well, I mean, we don't.
You said, no.
So just because we don't read necessarily that Jephthah did that, doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Because the Bible doesn't cover every single detail, right? I mean, it is historical. And they didn't say, well, you lied. Yeah, so obviously he did call on them, and they didn't
Called on him
answer,
before and they didn't help.
and they didn't help him.
So
So
why would you call them again?
So some commentators have explained this, that the people of Ephraim were not affected by the raids of the Midianites, going back to chapter 8, and they were not affected by the raids of the Ammonites in chapter 12. And since it didn't affect them directly, they turned a blind eye to it, and they didn't get involved in the problem. And is that a way to treat other people when you know that these are fellow Israelites, these are fellow brethren, and they knew that there was a problem, but they just, no, we're not going to help you. And
Until there was some type of glory to be gotten from it, and then suddenly, oh, why'd you leave us out?
so it kind of violates the golden rule, treating other people the way you'd want to be treated. If you were having a problem and somebody knew that you had a problem that you were dealing with, wouldn't you want fellow Christians to help you out in that problem? Yeah, I mean, Matthew 7:12. I'll give you some other verses that can go along with this. So that was Matthew 7:12. Luke 10:25 through 37. And I thought this verse was pretty interesting from the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 14:21. It says it's a sin to despise your neighbor. And who's our neighbor?
Everyone.
Everyone. And in a sense, they despised. We know. You've read this chapter, and for those that have read it and have answered these questions, you know later on how they viewed their neighbor, the Gileadites. So it's a sin. So question number 3 goes to Granny. Now you have to say her official name.
Granny
Thank you, Chloe, for saying that. All right. All right. Question 3 says, what does Jephthah say he took?
He took his life in his own hands when he crossed over.
All right. Verse number. All right. So what does it mean to take your life in your own hands?
He's going to be in control. Like, he's going to take control of the situation himself.
Okay. Take.
Not rely on other people.
Okay. All right.
Proactive despite other people dragging their feet.
All right. All right. Anybody else got any thoughts on that? It could mean that he put himself in the utmost danger. He knew he was going into a very dangerous situation, but nobody else was going to, those other tribes weren't going to help him. The Gileadite people didn't help him. He was all on his own, taking on those enemies that they should have drove out a long time ago. That's the kicker of it all, right? Anyway, there are some other people in the Bible that took their life into their own hands, facing danger. And I guess you'd say that that's the thing about being a Christian, is about courage. Jephthah was a courageous man. Perfect? No, but courageous, willing to fight those people. How about David?
I was just going to say that, David.
King David, 1 Samuel 19, verse 5 says this was Jonathan. Jonathan was defending David to his father Saul. You remember Saul wanted to kill David? And Jonathan says David took his own life in his own hands, right? He was brave. David was brave. So that's, again, 1 Samuel 19, verse 5. There was a lady who clearly violated the Old Testament will of God, the law, and when she did that, she took her own life into her hands because there was a law that stated anybody that was a medium or a witch would be put to death. And it was a miraculous event that happened, right? I don't know how to put it. Samuel talked through her to King Saul. You can read about that in 1 Samuel 28, the witch of Endor. Okay, 1 Samuel 28, verse 21. And she said when she spoke that way and revealed who she was, she took her own life at risk because Saul could have had her killed instantly because it was a violation of God's will. Job, how about Job? And he a good example of Job 13, verse 14. And then Psalm 119, verse 109, the psalmist talks about taking his life in his own hands. A lot of people attribute that to David again, but there's a good verse, Psalm 119, verse 109. All right, any other thoughts or comments? Question number 4. And yes, she did. She did that because Saul asked her. She still violated the command. If I asked somebody to go steal something, it would still be wrong for them to steal, right, even though I asked them. But Saul had every right. He could have put her to death because that was the Old Testament law. Could have been a test, but he was seeking counsel, though. He was trying to find out why God turned against him. And so Saul was involved in some shady stuff at that point in his life. All right, question number 4 goes to my mom. Sorry, my mom. I'm gonna start having the young people actually say names, just because I know they feel.
It's not as bad until it gets to someone from my family, and then it just feels wrong.
Yeah, I know, it's funny. So question number 4 is, how did the Ephraimites view the Gileadites?
I said not very kindly, as fugitives among them and the Manassites.
All right, verse 4. So do you think this is like a term of endearment?
No, they thought them like scum.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, you're fugitives. We care about you. No, this is a view of contempt, looking down their noses at fellow brethren. They view them as being suspicious, inferior. And so here's a reminder of the dangers of rivalry. There's some rivalry going on here. I know there's friendly rivalry that people can have. Sometimes you have that in school competition. This is not what's going on. This is not a friendly rivalry. The reality is they weren't rivals. But that's the way the Ephraimites were viewing other tribes as their rival. They were all God's people. And let me just share this. Thousands of years later, here's a lesson that we can learn. There's no place for rivalry in the church. There's just no room for it. That is not what God wanted, because it creates division, it creates conflict, it creates a lack of love, it creates a lack of compassion, and it causes us to lose focus on what the most important thing is, and that's Christ. So here's why it's important to study things like the book of Judges, because you can learn important lessons that apply to us today. All right, question number 5, does anybody have anything extra? No? Okay. Just to give you guys an update, if you're watching this on YouTube, yes, you're right, Catherine, it was an insult. So far, nobody has collapsed yet because of the heat. They've stopped fanning, so maybe that means they're in the process of overheating. I'm not sure. All right, so I see tears, not happy tears, over here at the young people table. I'm going to guess question number 5 goes to Chloe. All right, Chloe, question number 5. Who won the fight between Ephraim and Gilead? That's a pretty easy question. All right, Gilead won the fight. Okay, what verse did you get that from? Verse or verses? Or did you get that from someone else's sheet? Verse 4 and 5. Okay, I included another verse in there. All right, so 6 in there as well. So Gilead, they took control of the shallow crossings of the Jordan River. They were controlling things there. How many Ephraimites were killed? 42,000 Ephraimites were killed. So Alexander Campbell. I know Alexander Campbell was mentioned in our, or Addison, you got a question?
What did you say they captured?
The shallow crossings of the Jordan River. There's another name for it, but and we'll talk about that later. Yes, and that's really what that word means. If you control the waterways, you control a lot. So a lot of times, what's that?
Water is life.
So a lot of times in our day and age, yes, there are countries that fight over oil and gasoline. That's a huge one. But another huge one is people fight over waterways. They want to be able to control the ports, what goes in and out of cities. Why do you think Russia took over that sea area over there? Because they wanted to control the ports and the food and the resources going in and out of Ukraine. You can control that.
This is the limit of the whole of
Yeah, you cut this off, and you're going to keep people from fleeing, and you're going to prevent them from going out and getting resources.
That was how
Yep.
they were winning for a long time.
Yep.
They took over towns that were on port cities
Yep.
and kept people from coming in and kept people from getting out.
Well, the Chinese are running the Panama Canal right now.
It's scary, yeah. So Alexander Campbell, Hayden made a reference to him in his sermon on Sunday, but Campbell said this: many times since that sad event here in Judges 12, strife among the people of God has occurred because of the same sort of pride, jealousy, and hurt feelings. And that is sad. And he saw it back in the 1800s, 1700s. It goes on today. But here's a philosophical thought. Yes, we know Gilead in some ways won the battle. But does anyone really ever win a fight or a battle?
Now 42,000 people are dead.
But in reality, do you really win the battle? You may have won it, but do you really win it?
No.
Do you not think that there's going to be
Still-
tension?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. There's still tension no matter how you handle it. People are going to be angry or hurt, and they're going to hold on to that. They're going to try
Yeah.
to, get over it, but deep
There will
down, it's
be
still
still
there.
animosity between all those groups of people, and so yeah, you can think about that. Do you really win a fight or battle?
Well, you can say that about Palestine, Gaza Strip and all that. So how many years are gonna go before they can make up and not fight?
Never. They will always fight. But it goes right back to the book of Judges that we've been studying about, because last week when you had those people say, well, that was our land, well, Israel took it from other people, and it wasn't Israel that took it, it was God that gave it to them. And so they were fighting thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago for that same land that they're fighting over still today. So part of the problem is when you have people move in and then claim portions of land as theirs forever and ever and ever in perpetuity, and they refuse to acknowledge that it's not rightfully theirs. And that's all I'm going to say about it, because we might get
Half the time
banned
they don't
or
even know what
flagged
they
on
were fighting
YouTube.
for when they're done.
Yeah.
Yep.
And there still will be animosity. There'll still be animosity between people. And the reality is, we're all humans and we're all neighbors, right? And so we violate that doing good to other people. So, sorry, I just saw the woodchuck crossing the. I said woodchuck, not Chuck Verhulst, crossing the yard back there. All right, question number 6. Have you guys spun the wheel yet?
Hi, Woody.
Woody, that's a cute name for him. All right, who does question number 6 go to? Question 6. Did you notice something, Glenn? They didn't chuckle when it came to your name. There was no.
It's just a very serious fact.
Yes. All right, question 6 is, what word was used to test if someone was an Ephraimite trying to escape? Make sure you say it the proper way.
They don't lay down like they're.
All right, verse number. All right, did everybody get that?
No.
Shibboleth.
Shibboleth. So it was either, all right, so yes, they would ask them, hey, are you an Ephraimite? No. Okay, then say this word. And then they would say it a strange kind of way. So I looked up the literal meaning of this particular word, and there's some debates as to what the word
River or stream or ear of rain / corn.
ear of corn or river.
Yeah.
I think people aren't really sure. So the point isn't really what the word meant.
It's that
It was a
they left
test.
out that SH sound.
So what we learn here, thinking about this, is, and what's significant here is, obviously there were different dialects within the nation of Israel. You had the people on the east side of the Jordan that would pronounce things a certain way, and you compare to the people on the west. Are there different dialects in the United States?
Absolutely.
You guys were...
Oh, I say y'all all the time, and everybody makes fun of me for it.
Well, we were talking a little bit earlier, and I just tried to not say anything about it, but like people in Boston, New York, they drop the R's, right? They sound a little, no offense, they sound different to maybe Midwesterners, and that's just dialects. If you go from up north and you go down south, did you notice a different dialect or sound when you guys were in Oklahoma? A little bit, not too much. Did you notice any of that in Tennessee? Yeah, all right, so, you know. All right, so even in the United States, there's different dialects, right?
Yeah, New Jersey people in Florida drives me nuts, and I say, "Where's the Larry?"
Even in Ohio, from northern Ohio.
Northern Ohio to southern Ohio, a little bit.
On the east side, they sound southern, and that's all in one state.
And not just dialects, but even certain words that you may have been influenced by. Like, how about, what is petrol?
Yeah.
All right, but do we use the word petrol?
I do.
All right, do 99%, 99.9%?
No.
No. So, but where does the idea of petrol, that word petrol, come from? It's it's Britain. It's a European. What's that, Laura? Yeah, it's the Old English. It's the Britain petrol. I know that there's the gas station, the truck stop petrol, but that's...
There's a different name for a hot dog too in England, isn't there? Banger or something like that.
Oh, there's all kinds of weird things, and there's fish and chips, there's bangers and mash, there's all kinds of cool things, biscuits or cookies. Anyway, so there could be some cultural influence.
Here suggest that our biscuits are the same thing as an actual biscuit over there. They will root me for it.
You can watch YouTube videos about European or Britain people reacting to our food over here. I think our palates over here, we gravitate toward the sweet stuff, and they're a little bit more, just blah kind of, yeah.
Bland.
Yeah.
Very bland.
So, even cultures can impact our language and the way we talk. Same thing, thousands of years ago, depending on where they lived and the tribes that they came from, they would say certain words like shibboleth or sibboleth. Makes kind of interesting, right? Maybe.
Well, one could mean they're a corn and the other could mean river.
Could be.
They're probably talking about the river since that's where they were.
That's what I thought too. But it's just
it might be like,
it's strange that some of these
what is
people
this that
can
you wanna
catch
cross?
on and figure out suddenly how to add in that SH sound, because I don't know. If I got word that my friends were getting killed because they didn't say shibboleth, I'd be like, shibboleth.
Well, maybe that's why they took them out and got rid of them before they could learn what the secret word was. Rough. I mean, right? I mean, these are warriors. I mean,
42,000 long.
yeah. All right. Question number 7 goes to. All right. While you're spinning that, it does remind me of I think it was an Audie Murphy war movie. Because, like in World War II, people could figure out. People in Europe look a lot like us, right? So you'd have to figure out code words. In this movie, I think they would throw out the word like apple, and then if somebody came back and said, I don't know, tart or whatever, they knew that they were the enemy. But if they said like pie, apple pie, then they knew that they were American. So, it's interesting. These things still, you can use code words, right, to figure out who's enemy, who's not enemy. All right. I see chuckling. Is that Rachel? Rachel, all right. I'm going to guess you don't have this answered.
No, I do.
Okay. So question 7. This is a pretty easy question.
I was more worried about what question we were on.
Oh, okay.
I looked at the paper and I got distracted.
7.
I had to remind myself too, so don't feel bad. How long did Jephthah judge Israel?
6 years.
All right, verse
7.
verse 7. All right, so you got the question right, and you got verse 7 right. All right, so
I noticed that verse 1 is question 1, 2 is 2, 3 is 3, 4 is 4,
Yes,
5 is
exactly.
5, 6 is 6, 7 is 7, 8 is 8, 9
Hey.
is 7.
yeah, well, hey, that was not intentional. So after his death, we do see that there was 3 minor judges. Uh-oh, we get to take her name off the list. Bye, Marlene. There's after Jephthah, he's followed up by 3 minor judges. Okay, now when we say minor, we're not talking about the guys in the coal mines, and we're not talking about meaning that they're less significant. Right, so the same concept with the minor prophets. It didn't make them any less important. It's just those books were smaller. They were not as long. So these sections describing these up and coming 3 men are pretty small, right? But keep this in mind. At one time, and again, this goes for just verses 1 through 7 here. At one time, during Moses's and Joshua's leadership, Israel was united together. They were unified. They were working together. They fought together. Remember in Numbers 32 when Moses began to give the people the land, and he says, oh, you tribes to the east, you can have this land because you guys are great farmers, but the condition is you have to go over and fight for your brethren. Even though it doesn't directly involve you, you have to fight for them and help them. So that's Numbers 32. They kept their promise. In Joshua 22, they kept the land. And now what we see, up to this point in Judges 12, Israel was now fighting against each other. And you remember what Hayden shared on Sunday about a divided house or a divided kingdom? It cannot stand.
It will soon fall.
Yes. And you can read all about that in Matthew 12 and Mark 3 and Luke 11. Matthew 12, Mark 3, and Luke 11. All right. Anybody else have any thoughts or comments on those first 7 verses? All right, we're going to continue on verse number 8 and go through verse 15, the end of the chapter here. It says, after him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons, and he gave away his 30 daughters in marriage, and brought in 30 daughters from elsewhere for his sons. He judged Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. After him, Elon the Zebulunite judged Israel. He judged Israel 10 years. And Elon the Zebulunite died and was buried at Ajalon in the country of Zebulun. After him, Abdon the son of Hillel the Pirathonite judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 young donkeys. He judged Israel 8 years. Then Abdon the son of Hillel the Pirathonite died and was buried in Pirathon in the land of Ephraim in the mountains of the Amalekites. All right. I'm glad that that section was a little shorter because there's a lot of interesting names in there. All right. You got to spin the wheel. Let's see who question number 8 goes to. Laura Raymond. She's not here, so maybe we can spin the wheel again, and we'll leave her name on the list.
This wheel doesn't like us. Oh, you know what?
Alright, now it goes for Paul instead.
All right, Pa instead. All right, who was the next judge?
After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem,
All right, verse number 8. So, do we know very much about Ibzan of Bethlehem? Well,
It was very interesting.
yeah, so not a whole lot of detail here, but we do learn a little bit about his family.
Right.
So what do we know about his family?
He had 30 sons and apparently 30 daughters, and he gave him at least 30 daughters because it says he gave away 30 daughters in marriage. So it doesn't say that he had 30 daughters. He may have had more.
And all married.
So he gave away 30 daughters,
And so it's
and
like
he got,
outside marriages, like
Yeah.
intermarriaging. So I don't know if that just sounds like that was a bad ideal to me. Just saying.
a lot of prominent people would do that for power, and a lot of kings and whatnot would do that. And so he gave away 30 daughters. What did he get in?
Brought in 30.
30 wives for his sons. Yeah.
He judged for 7 years.
All right. So I thought it was kind of interesting. He judged for 7 years. How long did Jephthah judge for? 6. All right. So that's
So a lot could have happened that we don't know about.
maybe could have. So that brings us up to question 9. You got lucky, Laura. Your name was called, and all right. Addison gets the next one. What judge was after him?
Elon, the Zebulunite,
All right.
verse 11, and I said he also judged 10 years.
All right. So again, he judged 10 years
Less said about him.
compared to 6 years of Jephthah, who had a chapter and a half written about him. Elon, what was that? Just how many verses did he have? 2 verses, right? 11 and 12. I would say that he does seem, if you look at some genealogy here, he seems to be a descendant of Jacob through Leah and their son. Well, he was a Zebulunite, so that means he would have come from the tribe of Zebulun. So Genesis 46, verse 13. And he probably was, sometimes people in history, don't they name their children after other people in their genealogy? So if you look at Genesis 46, verse 13, what you'll see is Zebulun had a son whose name was Elon.
Where's that?
Genesis 46, verse 13. So a little bit of speculation, but maybe he was named for his great grandpa, however many greats that would be. All right. Anybody got anything else on Elon?
I just added the next judge. 'Cause
This Elon is not to be confused with the space guy, all right, and the Twitter guy. All right.
So verse 13 is Abdon.
Well, hold on a second. Spin the wheel.
Well, that's not a
Who?
question.
Laura's turn.
Laura's turn. Okay, well, it could be included in here because where was Pirathon located?
In the land of Ephraim, in the mountains of the Amalekites,
All right, verse.
14.
All right, so,
But it's right here.
all right, it was right there.
Good job.
15.
So if you had your hand like this and this was the promised land, it was right here. All right.
15.
Verse 15, I put 15.
And
It's
there's
just-
nobody's
it's-
actually for sure where it is,
Yeah.
but that's approximately where it's thought to be.
Yeah, and this is where Abdon,
Oh, my bad.
this is where Abdon was from, right? I felt like if I just asked who was the next judge, that was just kind of getting a little bit redundant, so I needed to change that question up a little bit. But that was where that last judge, Jody wanted to mention that, Abdon, who was his dad? Hillel. So we see that in verse number 13. And Pirathon, yeah, so this is where he was buried, verse 15. How many sons did he have?
40.
How many grandsons did he have?
30.
And how many donkeys did the grandsons ride on?
70 young donkeys.
Wait, the grandsons rode on 30. That was a trick.
That was a trick question. But it does say he had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 young donkeys. So, I mean, if it could sound like the anyway, we're getting crazy math. Again, it was pointed out a couple weeks ago, that's, when you had large animals, you were rich, right? Today, do we necessarily think of it that way today?
No.
We don't generally think as farmers as being rich, agricultural.
Poor, honestly.
What's that?
They're usually
Well,
considered poor.
There are some setups like in Wisconsin that's like you have tons and tons and tons of dairy cattle, and you have big, huge, beautiful barns. They're wealthy.
I'd say considered.
Yeah.
They're looked upon as not. They're not. That's the stereotypical.
Yeah, they're
But
not-
back in the day, if you had large livestock, flocks of livestock, and all that, like Abraham, Job, you were considered wealthy. You were wealthy. So he was a wealthy man. He judged how many years?
8.
8 years. Again, he judged 2 more than Jephthah. So each of these 3 minor prophets judged longer than Jephthah. Josephus said this. Now, Josephus, he was a historian to Rome. Thousands of years later, he was not an inspired man. He was Jewish. He was a Jewish man that Rome hired to to write down the history of the Jewish people. So he wrote down that during this time period, things were peaceful and there were no glorious actions. That's why we don't read of any big events taking place. And he said here with Abdon, he had a very magnificent burial. And it does mention that he died and he was buried. So maybe Josephus was onto something there. All right. Anybody got any extra thoughts or comments in regards to this particular section, verses 8 through 15? It's kind of short and sweet, right? Not much is said about these particular judges. All right. So who hasn't answered a question yet? You?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll just give you the bonus. Is there anybody else? I think everybody's answered a question, right? So Jody, how many hands and Fords are in this chapter?
3 hands and 2 Fords.
All right. Anybody?
3 and 3, and then Fords are in 5 and 6.
6. All right. Very good. Excellent.
And when I first saw, I didn't read this, I saw the question and I thought, is that some kind of trick question? Is there a car in here somewhere? But then I saw the other and I went, oh, okay, never mind.
I was just wishing there's some
I
way.
didn't know what that was.
Yeah, sure.
So I asked John, I said, well, honey, what is this? Because I'm thinking it's a car and it's not a car.
I'm just wishing there was some way I could have said like Ford Mustang
Yeah.
or Ford F-150, but
Yeah.
maybe if I spend some time.
T-Bird, Thunderbird. There goes back.
I just could not figure out anyway Fords. I thought short and sweet and that would be confusing. So shallow crossings is another way to put it in the that was in reference to the Jordan River. Wait till next week's bonus question. I don't even remember what it said. I can tell you what part of it said, not the other part. Yeah. Anyway, all right. What?
How many Fords?
Not Fords. GMs.
Fords.
Of course. How many Hondas? How many
That's
Hondas?
the wrong book in the Bible, sorry.
That'd be funny. I have to keep that one in mind. All right. If there's nothing else, I think my dad volunteered to do the prayer tonight. So here you go, Dad.
They still can't hear me.
I tried.
Father in heaven, thank you for being back in church. Thank you, Father, for the lesson we studied tonight. Pray, Father, for all of us who are here. Ask, Father, for a wonderful night's rest when we get home. Continue to bless Brother John Barker. Continue to bless him and make him well, Father. Thank you, Father, that you're still keeping in touch with him. You're blessing him every day, Father. Yes, we truly thank you. Go with us now, Father, as we go to our homes. Bless us, Father. Help us to be back in church services again Sunday morning. All these many blessings we ask in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Hope you guys are better soon, Chuck and Catherine. Have a good night.
Wow.